So I'm going to start us off. My name is Shelley Nicely Groff. I, together with Walter Spiegel, I co-chair this initiative. I am the past JCRC chair in Miami, Florida, and a member of the JCPA board. I am going to ask Walter to introduce himself in a moment, and then we're going to ask everybody on the call to just introduce yourself and where you're from, and I'm just going to moderate that because some of us are on the proverbial Hollywood squares, and others of us are on the phone. So this way we won't talk all over each other. So Walter, quick introduction.
Sure. I'm Walter Spiegel. I am the current chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Cincinnati, and also a member of the JCPA board.
Great. Okay. I have Betty and Arthur Levy on the phone, or on my screen.
Hi.
Hi.
We are co-chairs of New Haven, JCRC.
Sue Hochberg. Have to unmute yourself, Sue.
Yeah. Sue, you're on mute.
You're still on mute.
Hi, everybody. I lost the screen. I'm from Toledo, Ohio, the JCRC in Toledo, Ohio.
Welcome.
You?
Adam Weiss.
JCRC Santa Barbara.
Welcome. Laura Matthews. You have to unmute yourself. Oh, you can't unmute. Okay, so Laura Matthews is with us, and am I reading right that you're from Rochester? Great, welcome. Bob Silverman.
Bob Silverman, and I'm the CRC chair from Pittsburgh.
Right. Jennifer Steinberg.
Hi, I'm Jen Steinberg. I'm the co-chair of the JCRC for Delaware.
Daniel Goldwyn. Can't hear you, Daniel. Still can't. Oh, now you're muted, Dan. Where are you from, Daniel?
Not getting anything.
Okay, maybe write it in the chat, and then I'll go to the chat at the end, and I can let everyone know where you're from.
Sorry, Dan Goldman is from Chicago.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Haya. Aaron Welcher.
JCRC Indianapolis.
Great. Welcome. Sherry Goldberg and friend. Sherry, unmute yourself. There you go.
Sherry, try now.
Thanks. Sherry Goldberg, and I've got Benny here with me, and we're from Greater Metro West, New Jersey.
Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Eva Lippman.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. I'm Ava Lippman, and I am co-chair for Silicon Valley JCRC, and I was also a Frank Fellow last year. So
Terrific.
And I'll be there in DC this year. I'm really excited.
I look forward to seeing you in person, Ava. Great. Okay. Kevin Epstein.
This is Kevin Epstein from San Antonio, chair there, and I apologize, but I'll have to drop off the call in about 25 minutes.
We'll take you for as long as we can get you. Thank you for being with us while you can. Ari, am I pronouncing this right? I'm butchering a couple of these. Balaban? Am I getting that right? Unmute yourself, Ari. There you are.
So Ari Balaban, you're pretty close. I'm JCRC director in Dayton, Ohio.
Great, welcome. Melanie, it looks like Melanie Rubin.
Hi, I'm Melanie Rubin from Dallas.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Edgardo?
Yes, I'm Edgardo Laber, co-chair Silicon Valley JCRC.
Terrific, welcome. Robert Spitzer. Can't hear you, Robert. Oops. Nope. Something's not working. Maybe put we see you waving. Thank you.
You can share your information in the chat box if you like, and we'll share it that way.
Josephine.
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm from West Palm Beach County, VP of JCRC.
Great, welcome, another South Florida person.
Yeah, hi.
Alan Jablin. Alan, are you able to unmute yourself?
Alan is the chair from Tucson.
Phoenix.
Oh, Phoenix. No,
Phoenix.
thank you. So, Alan, you posted in the chat. Thank you. Thank you.
Same state, wrong, different city.
Sorry about that.
Michael Rassler. Michael? Okay, Mike, if you could.
He might be muted. Michael is our executive in Santa Barbara.
Great, Adam, thank you. Deborah Olshansky. Can you say hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, great, welcome.
Thank you.
Beth Salomon.
Testing now.
Beth Salomon, you here? Okay. Beth, if you're able to, maybe post in the chat where you're from and we'll let everyone know.
Sorry, Beth is the chair in Louisville and she's incoming.
Great, welcome.
Also joining us at the conference.
Wonderful, terrific.
As I know a few of you are, but.
I hope a lot of you are. I want to meet you all in person. Lynn Azrahi, I hope I pronounced that right. Lynn, welcome. Where are you from? Lynn, can you hear me?
I have Lynn as the chair from Princeton.
Wonderful. Welcome, Lynn. Let's see. Now I'm trying to see. Okay, I have somebody here. I don't see your name, but your phone number is the 757 number.
That's me. This is Megan Zuckerman. I am chair of CRC in Tidewater, so Virginia Beach and Norfolk.
So welcome. And I see Rob Spitzer's here from Seattle. Great, Rob. Thank you. Another number, 609 number. You're on the phone.
This is Lynn Hi, this is Lynn Hazarki from New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
Okay, are there any, before I ask our professional team to introduce themselves, are there any JCRC directors or chairs who are with us who have not already had the chance to say hello and introduce themselves? Daniel Brent, I just saw your name pop up. Daniel, are you able to introduce yourself?
I can. Wow. I'm Dan Brent, just figuring out how to use Zoom.
You're all set. We can hear you.
You're good. Where are you from, Dan?
Princeton, New Jersey.
Welcome. Any other chairs or directors who've not yet been able to introduce themselves? Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. I'm now going to invite the members of our professional team to introduce themselves. We have David Bernstein is with us. David? I thought you were with us.
Hi, I'm David Bernstein. I'm President and CEO of JCPA. I'm so glad to join you.
Welcome. And Haya? I think we all know Haya, but Haya, say hello.
I'm Haya Lustig, a vice president with JCPA. And if you need anything after these calls, please go ahead and email me or call me, and I'm happy to give you whatever you need.
And we're going to be hearing more from Doug Kahn in a little bit, but Doug, take a moment and just say hello and introduce yourself for those who haven't met you yet.
Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Kahn. I'm the Director Emeritus in San Francisco and a consultant to JCPA. And one of my favorite sports is coming up with really awful scenarios.
Yes, we have Doug to thank for this. And finally, I saw that Martin Raffel was here. Martin, are you still on? Can you say hello? Maybe Martin.
Hello?
Oh, there you are.
You're muted. You're set now.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Martin Raffel, past Senior Vice President of JCPA. And like Doug, I've also been consulting for JCPA in recent years. Although on this particular session, I don't have any formal role. I'm looking forward to learning.
Well, thank you for joining us, Martin. So today's topic is crisis management, which is something that we all have to deal with at some point. And I'm now going to turn the agenda over to my co-chair, Walter, who is going to introduce us to the topic that we're addressing today. So Walter, all yours.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. And I'm particularly glad to see such great representation across the state of Ohio. David will count you as an official member of the Ohio delegation as well. So as Shelley said, our topic today is when things get messy, crisis management. And so what we're going to be talking about is how to address and how to respond to issues that become a significant community crisis. And I think as you'll see in all of the scenarios, in all of these situations, JCRC finds itself right in the middle of the crisis and having to deal with various community players on how to respond and frankly how to lead the community in response to that crisis. A crisis can be a short-term crisis or it can be a long-term situation. It can range from an anti-Semitic incident within the community, a violent attack, an outbreak of war in the Middle East, significant government relations issues, government policy issues. But what all of these situations have in common is that they are out of the ordinary flow of our normal workday. They are interruptions in the day in, day out work. And they tend to bring out a significant segment of the community that has very strong opinions on that issue. What we often find is that in a crisis situation, they get very messy and they get even more challenging as the further into the crisis you get. Crisis can be both an internal crisis within our Jewish community and can be something that is external to the Jewish community. In all situations, what you will find undoubtedly is that a crisis is all-consuming and draining for both the local JCRC professional and the lay leaders who are charged with trying to lead JCRC through the crisis. There are obviously important roles for lay leadership, for the professional staff, how to address the crisis within the community, how to bring the community together, and frankly, how to keep a crisis from spinning out of control. So the way that we're going to work through this today is rather than talking in the abstract, Doug Kahn has deviously devised 3 scenarios, all of which are frankly based on real life situations. Doug has kind of taken different situations from all across the country, put them into together. And I think as you read them, what you're going to find is that they are situations that would prove challenging to any of us as lay leaders of JCRC to try to lead our JCRC and lead the community without letting the situation, frankly, spin out of control. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up into 3 groups, and each group is going to take one of the scenarios, and we're going to walk through the scenario and talk through how we might respond to those scenarios, what kind of actions we might take, how we would address the different demands on JCRC. I'm going to take scenario 1. Doug is going to lead the discussion on scenario 2, and Shelley is going to lead the discussion on scenario 3. We're going to take about a half an hour to do that, and then we're all going to get back together and we're going to report back on some of the lessons that we've talked about. So I'm going to turn it over to Haya, who's going to walk through the technical aspects of how we're going to break up into groups.
Haya, before we do that, I did just want to say a couple things by way of introduction for the scenario exercise. Thank you, Walter. That I think you laid it out perfectly. I just wanted to say a couple of things. The first is to let all of you know, and we do have several directors on the call, that we've done this kind of training over the last couple of years with directors. I think it's part of this expanded JCPA effort to try to be responsive to what the needs are in the field. And this is an area that keeps on coming up. And I thought it was also very important to bring to a session with the CRC chairs. The second thing is I want to say this, lest I forget later, that we have strongly encouraged people, take these kinds of scenarios and go back in your communities and do the same exercise with your key leadership, professional and lay, because there's no way to fully prepare for everything that's going to come down during the course of a crisis. But having gone through scenario exercises can really help, allows one to almost take a breath when otherwise it's impossible to catch one. The third thing I wanted to emphasize, and Walter did mention this, is these are composites. They're drawn from real experiences, but they're not like anybody can say, oh my God, that's exactly what we had happen. But all of them, I think, are realistic and again, drawn from real life. The final thing I wanted to emphasize before we break up into groups is these moments of crisis, which can be all-consuming, can be enormously draining. It's important to be concerned about the care and feeding of those on the front lines, and I would say particularly the CRC execs during these moments. And they can also be our finest hour. Time in and time out, it's been so clear that in moments of crisis, when JCRC has played a leadership role in the community, that the sense of gratitude and the sense of awareness and the sense of importance placed on that role has been absolutely enormous. So I just wanted to emphasize that. When you break up into your group, so I'll explain how it'll happen. Every group has a facilitator, and what we also need is a recorder in the group, somebody who will write things down and report back when we reconvene in 25 minutes. Recognizing that you could use 6 hours for these scenarios, but 25 minutes will hopefully give a good taste. I'll be excited, as all of us will, to hear what emerges from your discussions. So, Haya? You're on mute.
Haya, you're on mute.
It just goes to show you. Everyone except for the 3 leaders are going to be automatically put into different rooms. It's just random. Everyone will be unmuted when you enter those rooms. So bear in mind, if you have a lot of background noise, you should remute yourself. There will be a 5-minute notice when we're getting close to the end. And then when it's time to bring everyone together, you'll get a 60-second notice that we're joining back together. Thanks, everybody, and here you go.
That is amazing.
Isn't it?
I hope everybody had a blast.
Technology is amazing when it works well.
Right.
It's like Star Trek.
Right.
Great. Yeah.
Working well.
So Shelley, I think we're ready to hear from the groups.
We are ready. So we've got about 15 minutes. So each group gets 5 minutes to report back. Thank you to those who have taken the notes and are reporting. I'd like now to invite the note-taker reporter from Group 1 to share what you all discussed.
All right. Well, let me. Nobody in my group really wanted to take notes, so I'll go ahead, and I went ahead and took notes, and I'll try to summarize the view. And anybody else from the group can certainly jump in, and if I'm misstating this, but our scenario and Shelley, has everybody else looked at the scenarios or?
So the scenarios were sent to everybody. What we learned in our breakup group was some people had seen them already and some had not.
So
Okay,
Walter,
let
if
me
you could
get
not
just a
read
10-second
not read it, but just summarize in 2 or 3 sentences, that would be good.
Yeah, basically the scenario is that we've got a white nationalist march coming into our town, and then we discover that a prominent businessman was essentially funding the march, and everybody's very upset about that, and there's calls for a boycott of his business. There is also then efforts to organize an anti-hate campaign in response to the march, but it is discovered that one of the primary organizers of the anti-hate campaign is also a prominent supporter of BDS and has protested against the Jewish institutions. So that's the background. With respect to a boycott, there was really kind of a consensus view within our group that it's not a great idea for JCRC to be organizing a formal boycott of a business. The sense that by doing so, we are kind of, to some extent, strengthening the hands of those who like to boycott Jewish businesses, including the BDS movement. So the sense was we really don't want to be out there organizing a formal Jewish boycott. On the other hand, we want to make sure that we are disseminating information, that there's exposure, that there's media coverage, and in particular, that there's opportunities for education, such as, for example, maybe the JCRC trying to meet with the businessman and to bring light to the situation and to provide greater education to the community. On the second part, which was the BDS supporter who's helping to organize the anti-hate march or anti-hate coalition, there was a view that this is a particularly challenging situation. It's obviously very similar to some of what's going on right now with the Women's March. We obviously don't want to do, there was a real concern among the JCRC lay leaders who are part of the Federation about doing things that would upset the Federation and would undermine people who are significant donors to the community. The view was that this is a very fact-specific scenario, and we really need to look at how prominent a role that person has in the campaign. Is he like one of two? Is he one of five? Is it part of a broad community-wide coalition, or is this something that this person in particular is really driving? So the sense was we really need to look at it on a very specific basis, and it is a particularly challenging scenario. So that was kind of the sense of our group on scenario one. If anybody else wants to jump in, hopefully I didn't misstate it.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Group 1. Who is the reporter for Group 2?
I am. Hey, so did you want me to read through the scenario or?
Briefly, for a 10-second summary for those who had not had the chance to read it, please.
So a mosque in our local town has been defaced twice in the last month. The JCRC and other Jewish leaders want to go and show solidarity to the mosque and Muslim community. One big major donor is upset by this because there are rumors that the imam it supports extremism. So we one of the central ideas that we had was that we need to separate out the defacing from what the concern is, and that there's a way that we can both support the Muslim community and also distance ourselves from the extremism. At this time, there's been no confirmation of the extremism. So really trying to also build bridges between the JCRC and that donor to maybe try and explain our process and why we want to go and support the Muslim community. It was suggested that we could also look at an action flow chart and really make sure that there's a process in place for these kind of decisions. And then we had a part 2 to our scenario, which was that we find out 2 weeks later that there was a video of this imam specifically talking about extremism, and a leading pro-Israel group in our community is starting a boycott of campaign dollars to the Federation until the JCRC apologizes. We talked about that really that the JCRC should re-explain the reason we made the decision to move forward. We can apologize for not having the information at the time, but that we still feel like as a JCRC and the work we do, that we would have still supported and made the decision we made. You could use the First Amendment, that JCRC support the First Amendment, religious freedom of all religions, and that this is more than just the imam, but it's the whole religious community. We could also get key leadership into a meeting together and really show that process that we used and why we reached the decision we did to hopefully cool things down and make sure it doesn't look like it was just an impulse.
Two other things that were added that I'll just add briefly. Maybe you said this, Aaron, I didn't hear it. But one is, that many JCRCs have developed criteria for when to issue statements. That criteria is very relevant for this kind of situation as well, and that it's important, that key leadership, for example, in the Federation, understands that the JCRC goes through a very thoughtful process of determining what rises to a certain level, requiring a response from the JCRC. It's showing that it's thought out, that there's sort of independent objective criteria to the extent possible, I think is very, very important. The second is we also talked about the value of what we call bridges. That is to say, if there's a really frustrated, powerful donor, in this case, that there's somebody identified who's very close to JCRC and very close to that donor who can be brought in to be helpful in helping mitigate the response.
Thank you.
Can I just ask as a footnote, we're a very new JCRC in our community, just getting started. If there are any of these policies that people could send to us or tell me where the resource is, that would be great. You don't have to do it in this meeting, but
we have put together for directors, and we can share with this group as well, some of the wonderful templates that have been developed across the country. So we're happy to do that.
That would be super.
And share with this group.
Thank you. And we have a question in the chat from Melanie Rubin asking if it's possible to get a copy of the different tools used to assess which issues are handled.
Okay, which is the same thing, I think. So we will absolutely do that. Great.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Aaron, for reporting out. Jen was the reporter in group 3. So thank you, Jen.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So our scenario was a professor from the local university was brought in to speak at the annual Yom HaShoah event organized by the JCRC. He made some very controversial remarks regarding comparing Gaza to Warsaw and insinuating Nazi-like behavior on behalf of the Israeli government, how it must be condemned. His remarks were widely disseminated, and there was immediately uproar from local activists outside the community that the JCRC need to issue a public statement condemning his remarks and demand his ouster from the Jewish Studies Department. So immediately it had how to address these challenges immediately going forward. It was suggested to convene as many community stakeholders as possible, with the JCRC coming together to craft a statement of response, the importance of full support of lay leadership to communicate said message, circling back with the professor possibly to clarify what he meant and or what his agenda is. Also perhaps seeing who is connected to the university to set up meetings with people in the university. Ultimately, the goal is to diffuse the situation, provide perspective, point out what was done correctly, and to reiterate the position calmly that this is just one voice, and no, it is not the voice of the JCRC, and this is what JCRC does. Largely acknowledging a recognition again of what went wrong in this event, letting Federation be involved in handling the organized Jewish community while letting the JCRC engage with these outside activists to educate on what the JCRC will and will not do, to add additional service to the situation. After this event, there was a swastika pointed on the Hillel at the university, and now there's media interest. So it's this kind of a horrible storm of relationships between the Jewish community and the university, and the media is very interested. So how the idea was what are the parties and how to handle media interest and how to engage with this now. And it was sort of consensus was that immediately need to address the defacement, but specifically do not combine the responses with as the defacement is its own specific and serious issue. To get the local clergy, both Jewish and non-Jewish, plus the university to come together to condemn the defacement separate from the issue of the speech, and to keep and again, if the media brings up the speech issue, to respond to it, do not pretend that it didn't exist, but keep the response to it concise as what the role of JCRC does and what the JCRC will and will not do, and how the power to do this both comes from being a community convener.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add? Okay, well, thank you all. I hope that you found this a stimulating and good exercise. Thank you, Doug, for doing the magic that you do and putting these scenarios together.
Shelley?
Yes.
Shelley, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Deborah. It just occurred to me. I noticed that in 2 of the scenarios, we specifically referenced large donors. And I think there was probably a reason that was included in the scenarios. And I know that here locally, that's one of the challenges is obviously for practical reasons, we need to be aware of large donors and their voices, but balancing that out, because I feel like in the longer term, in the general community, if they feel like the only people who get hurt are the large donors, where it can be really problematic. And I would love at some point to explore that piece also of how we not give only power to the large donors.
Thank you for mentioning that. That is a recurring theme. So is the recurring theme of what I'll call sort of the grassroots groups that are asserting their own agenda from either the far left or the far right, and may want to also impose that here as well. So that's too a recurring theme that requires a lot of navigation. Any other comments or observations before we move on?
Doug, I think we're ready for you.
Great. So I want to thanks so much, Shelley, and thanks all of you for participating in these. Again, I want to emphasize that taking these kinds of scenarios and going through them can be very helpful, because it answers, I think, in part the question, while understanding that you can never anticipate exactly what might happen. And sometimes it's way beyond anybody's control. But nevertheless, are there things that we should have in place that will be helpful in addressing a scenario? What are the kinds of steps that we would take to kind of think about that in advance? Can, I think, be enormously helpful. Because again, you're not going to be able to tie a ribbon and neat bow around some of these. You just want to make a very messy situation not get even further out of hand and slowly be able to diminish in its impact. And its impact on the Jewish community, its impact on the JCRC and the like. And again, these are not always scenarios where JCRC is front and center initially, but by JCRC coming in to play, also has to think about how it positions itself in its leadership role in addressing these scenarios. So I hope this was useful. It's not drawn from fiction. It's really drawn from the kinds of things that are recurring. And if you go to each scenario and think about the mosque and the fact that there are often these claims of extremist views, and how could you get engaged with this individual or this institution? Or you think about the question of the call to boycott a business and the like, or the question, of course, of a speaker at a Jewish community event who suddenly makes an outrageous comment, and then how those spin out of control. So these all represent kind of recurring themes. And I think from my vantage point, what's really important to note is that there's oftentimes, I don't think any institution in the Jewish community better suited to help with crisis navigation and crisis management than JCRC, because we inherently know how to talk to the left, how to talk to the right, who we can bring in the room together without the room blowing up, who can we reach out to, who can mitigate. We are doing that in many ways on a daily basis, so automatically we sometimes don't even think about it. So we have to sort of apply those same skill sets when we're in a serious crisis situation. What other resources, by the way, nobody raised this. There are sometimes crises that emerge where you immediately need additional resources beyond anything you have. So one other thing I would sort of throw out into your thinking, is when do you go to a federation, when do you go to somebody and say, we have a crisis that is going to continue to grow. We need, this is a kind of all hands on deck. You know, we need 3 additional people working on these 3 angles to answer this crisis. I think sometimes realizing that we are really stretched thin and need to be able to immediately gain, that if we're going to gain an upper hand, we need to bring to bear other resources, and also an important part of this. There's one other element I wanted to briefly introduce today, and then let's open it up for any additional questions. And that is so there's crisis response, which is what we've talked about before. And then there is sort of what I'll call formal crisis communications. And Haya will put up on the screen a document that we'll share with everyone. And I'm not going to go through the entire document. It's in the handbook that all of you have been sent. And it's a template that we developed in San Francisco initially to do training for Jewish institutions on crisis communications. And here in the box at the very beginning, it defines what we mean by a crisis. And it says any situation that threatens your institution's safety, integrity, or reputation, usually brought on by an adverse or negative situation, often which garners media attention. And what we have come to realize, and I'm not sure every JCRC is necessarily able to play this role, but it's an invaluable role where JCRCs can play this role, is that many Jewish institutions need help when a crisis arises. And that much of that crisis management relates to the area of community relations. So for example, when we had a tragedy at Jewish camp 4 or 5 summers ago, and a tree fell and killed a staff member, there were 57 media outlets at their doorstep that morning, or 57 media calls that came into them that morning. They knew they had the best evacuation plan you could ever imagine. They didn't have a crisis communications plan, so they basically didn't answer any of those calls until we ran into the office and helped them, you know, develop a protocol for getting back to the media. And what this plan does is basically show without, and it, you know, it doesn't need to be as elaborate, but as you scroll through it, Haya, what you'll see is it shows the key positions that need to be put in place for a communications team, the key sequence checklist that has to be thought about across the board, and then the managing and the position of all of the items. So everything from thinking about, for example, security-related issues in the aftermath of an attack on the Jewish community, to who are designated as the spokespersons, and how do you create a protocol where you only have these 1 or 2 spokespersons, and how everybody knows who those spokespersons are. What's the role of the board of directors? We had another situation, tragically, at the same camp many years earlier, where a boulder slide near a national park killed a staff member, and it was the day before the end of a session, and the camp director wasn't sure what to do, how to communicate with all the families that were going to be dropping their kids off for the new session, and how word was going to get out. And my response to him was, that's why you have a board of directors. I'd call every one of them, have them in your office this afternoon, calling every family, so that when you convene them at the drop-off point tomorrow, they won't be surprised. And it worked wonders in terms of laying the groundwork. So if your community doesn't have a crisis communications plan, it's important that it does. I know that you know, we all hope that we'll never see a crisis such as the one that Pittsburgh recently encountered. But we also know that we can't say that we're not suddenly going to see a major crisis loom that could directly affect Jewish institutional life. And if JCRC can play that role of providing valuable counsel on the community relations aspects of managing a crisis, what you do when, you know, a swastika is put on the building and the media starts coming, you know, a swastika is drawn on a building and the media starts coming can be, I think, critically helpful to various Jewish institutions in their moment of greatest need. I will tell you that this has been applicable in a tragedy at a summer camp. It's applicable in a tragedy such as what happened at Tree of Life Synagogue. It's applicable when a major embezzlement happens at a synagogue and suddenly the public's going to know. It's applicable when all hell breaks loose with a major event at a Jewish institution that suddenly, unbeknownst to them, turned into an anti-Israel screed and people are outraged by it. It can be applicable in so many situations. The intent here is not to make work, rather it's to be able to get a handle on it such that the ability to respond will actually end up being much more efficient than it otherwise would at a time when the community might be so worked up that there is a calm effect of having a crisis communications plan, even while JCRC may be deeply invested in whatever has happened in the community. In the day and age in which we live in, I think not to have such a plan is a lapse. And I think if JCRC is positioned to help train other Jewish institutions to develop such plans, it can be invaluable. I will tell you anecdotally that in the process of doing such trainings, that we've had numerous institutions come to us and say, thank God we went through that training, because it enabled us to respond to a crisis in a far better way than we otherwise could have. So I didn't want us to have a session on crisis management that didn't also sort of introduce this concept as well. Let me pause there for comments, questions on anything we've talked about today, and hope that this document, which you now all will have as well, will be even due in the handbook, will be helpful too.
Quick question, how are you sending this document to us?
Yeah, I'll be emailing.
I assume we'll send it to.
After the session is over, we'll send out an email with this, a link to this video. I'll reattach the handbook, which we sent to the last call, and this document is a separate piece.
That answers my
The
second.
handbook. We'll be able, that would be great.
And then separately, we put together those examples of some of the criteria we've received from communities in, in terms of public statements and public actions.
Thank you. And Doug, Alan is asking if it's okay to share this material with other Jewish agencies in the community.
The crisis communications template, absolutely. I wouldn't distribute the scenarios, but the crisis communications template, 100%.
Doug, let me add one comment to that as well. One of the things that we've made a very intentional effort to do here is to try to, you talked about the media, we've really gone out and tried to develop those relationships with the media before there's a crisis. And I think that's really important, because what we have found then is that when something happens, you get some reporter who just happens to know a random Jewish person or a random rabbi, and they start calling that person up for the opinion of the Jewish community. And so one of the things that we've really tried to do here in Cincinnati is to position ourselves as the voice of the Jewish community and establish those relationships with the media before there's a crisis, so that if something happens, they know to call you rather than the random Jewish person that the reporter happens to know.
Critically important point, Walter. We're talking today about what happens when a crisis emerges, but the critically important work that's done day in and day out to build those relationships are the essential, the essence of trying to make sure that whatever crisis happens is managed in the best possible way.
Absolutely, and I would just underscore that by saying that another piece of that is to also establish your JCRC as a competent, trusted resource within the Jewish community, so that if there is a desire to reach out to the Jewish community, it just becomes that go-to place, because the JCRC is trusted and seen as that kind of resource. Very important.
Doug and others, I have a question specifically. I know this is focused on crises, and we know when to spot one, but I feel like the vast majority of our work day to day is around different shades of crises, or what other people consider. So whether it's a speaker or Jewish Voice for Peace, setting up in town, or there's so many different variations of it. And one of the things, we went through a new process because we're relatively new, of creating a process flow of when to make a statement and not. But what we don't have, and I'd love to get more examples of, is other than a statement, an official statement, what are all the various types of things that we could do where we're communicating back to either a small group of JCRC committee members or parts of the community, as opposed to a wider, more significant statement?
A statement on
our perspective. So for the Women's March,
right.
Not necessary to make a statement. Do we let it does our perspective become kind of an organic conversation?
Right.
How are ways to go about doing that are best practices?
And by the way, I'm sure you saw Nina's note, but maybe if we can send something out to the CRC directors and have anybody who's issued a statement on how they're responding to the Women's March, get that circulated, because that's clearly something people are interested in the communities. I want to say, and it's in a way a different topic, and I hope one that we'll also touch upon when we get together at the conference in Washington. I often say that issuing statements is often the least effective action for the most amount of source. That's not a good formula. The question always is, how can we be creative in what we're going to do? Is there a note that we want to send to individual institutions to express our solidarity on something? That's not necessarily, in all cases, a public note, but an expression from the Jewish community. Is there some piece of legislation that we're going to support on something? Are we going to have say that our way of dealing with it is to establish a dialogue with, with the people in the community? I mean, I think there's no one solution, but what I would say is that issuing a statement is often exactly what I said. It's often the least impactful action for the greatest amount of source. There are times where you're going to want to do it, but there are often many other times where you're going to want to take a look at another action. I mean, we have a case study. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in Birmingham, Alabama right now. I don't know if all of you have been following, but the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute just rescinded an award to Angela Davis, in part based on her support of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. The mayor of the city has said it was due to public pressure from the Jewish community. And all of a sudden, you've got this rift, you've got this crisis, you've got the media all over it. It started with the Birmingham newspaper, now the New York Times has it. So I think to look at each of these and say, how would we handle that if that happened in our community? Because it could easily happen in our community. There's no one perfect answer, except that the more we give thought to what would be the best response, the more planful we can be, even in a crisis moment. So I hope that's a helpful response to that, but it's definitely a topic that we'll talk more about when we get together.
I think there's Sue Hochberg sent a note that she wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you. As many of you probably know, Toledo, there was a terrorist attack thwarted against a synagogue or synagogues in Toledo.
Right.
Are you all aware of that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is more of a comment than a question. We don't have a formal communications crisis management plan, which I would advocate for, but I don't see the Federation truly understanding the efficacy of a functioning JCRC, because it really was a dormant part of Federation for many, many years. So there's a couple of issues that it related to this crisis that I could tell you are so challenging if anybody has any input. One of it, and this may not be unique, and I hope this stays within our little community here, is how siloed the synagogues are. And not looking at the community as a whole, but as security issues as it relates to their synagogue. And this idea of, meetings are only meant for us because we're the ones that were targeted. I mean, it was astonishing to me to be just listening to those kinds of things. We also have people that are really afraid, parents of young children in one of the synagogues in particular, to go to the synagogue without extra security. But I guess just in relation to the JCRC, how it may not be possible, we don't have a CEO right now, but we are the people that really can be the community convener, and I'm not sure how to take the steps to convince the Federation folks that that's our proper goal as opposed to theirs. So, and part of that is donor related, going back to the comment by Deborah earlier about, the big donors, staying away, or what issues to attack, or, it's not the JCRC's place to establish policy. It is the Federation's place. So I'm dealing with issues that I find, I wonder if anybody else is dealing with them. And if you are, how have you dealt with them? It seems like I'm a lay chair. I have a very full-time job, and it's taking a lot of my time, but I want to try to make this a functional, sustainable part of the Jewish Federation here.
So I'm cognizant of the fact that we're out of time today. So what I want to ask is if somebody in the chat line can indicate if you have been in dealing with something similar to what Sue said in terms of making that kind of case and can engage on this, that would be helpful. Obviously, that's one of the things I'm also working with communities on, so I'm happy to have a offline chat about it. But I also think that one of the ideas of doing these webinars is for everybody to get to know each other a little bit, which is why I love the breakout rooms. And so if somebody has gone through that journey that Sue described and hopefully come out of it on the positive end, that could be invaluable. And if you don't chat right now, but let Haya know, that would be great too.
Thank you.
So I think with that, we are coming to a close here. I would remind everybody that we have one more Zoom session planned, which is for January 24 at 1:30. The topic will be anti-Semitism, the growing challenge from the far left and the far right. Obviously, a significant topic for all of us in the JCRC community relations field. I would also urge those of you, if you are interested in continuing this conversation and you have not yet done so, please register for JCPA in Washington, D.C., which is February 9 through 12. And we are going to have a special session in the agenda for JCRC chairs, so we can continue this conversation live at that time. So if you haven't registered yet, it's going to be a great program, and I would urge everyone to do that. With that, Haya, do you have anything else to add? No? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. We'll look forward to seeing you again on January 24 and hopefully in Washington, D.C. In February.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Anyone who can be